Matt Highland, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Morning, Gareth. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, no complaints. No big complaints. Just another
Good
sunny day in
man.
Colorado.
Very nice. Yeah, we were just having a laugh off camera there, or off recording about my hair. It looks as if the barbers would need to open up very soon.
Yeah, it's not a good look for you, Gareth.
My girlfriend keeps hassling me. She wants to take the scissors and have a go herself, but I think I'll take my chances on the hair.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken at my own hair once before, and it was a big mistake. So yeah,
Very good.
I'll tell her to keep away.
Good man, good man. Well, listen, Matt, just for the people that don't know you and the audience, give us an idea of just quickly what you're doing now and your qualification, and then we'll jump back to your early days in construction.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Matt Highland, as you said. I'm an Australian expat, if you can't tell the accent, here in Denver, Colorado. I'm a senior cost manager with Cummings Corporation. We use the term cost estimator or cost manager pretty interchangeably. So a senior estimator, for those who aren't familiar with the term cost manager. So I manage a lot of kind of bigger clients out here, top 4 tech firms and a lot of the commercial construction out here. So just working on the consultancy side, giving clients and owners and developers what they need for their projects.
Very good. Well, I have to say now, you haven't got as strong as an Australian accent as I would have thought, to be honest. Was that always the case, or has it softened since you got to the US?
It's definitely softened. I would say that when I first moved here, I started to speak a lot slower. Not to offend all the people out there, but just to help them understand. It was very much every time I got into an Uber or a Lyft, those kind of things, they would go, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Guess," and they would go, "Like, you're talking way too fast, mate. I can't understand a damn thing you're saying."
Yeah.
So I definitely learned to talk a bit slow, which helped. But there's always certain words that people go, "What did you just say? Can you spell that for me?"
Yeah.
But my dad was initially born in America, and then he moved to Scotland, and then he moved to Australia. So he's got one of the strangest accents you'll ever hear. So maybe growing up next to him just buttoned it down a bit.
Very good. No, it's not bad now. We had Martin Walsh on last week. He was an Irish guy, and between the two of us, we were. I'm not too sure how many people actually listened to it or understood it. So, but I think yours is nice. It's soft enough, as you say. You've got the speed down to a fine art. So, I need to take some pointers there. I struggle. I struggle to slow down, but also struggle with the words and the language and the terminologies. But it takes time.
Yeah, being a numbers guy, when I first moved over, I started, an internal tally of who thought I was what. And, every time someone thinks I'm Irish or British or Scottish or, New Zealand, it's it's always funny. But, these days I'm getting a little bit more used to it. So I don't mind the good old where you're from.
Good. Well, speaking of that, let's go all the way back. Although when you first reached out to me, I thought, great. I would like to get another expat on, because the expat one last week with Martin Walsh went really well, and the audience was some fantastic feedback. So it was perfect. And I always, obviously having worked in Australia for a couple of years myself, I always would like to see more people coming over from Australia, because I think there's, along with the UK and Ireland, there's a lot of good qualified quantity surveyors. So let's go back 2014, pre-education. What was the thinking behind construction management degree? Were you always thinking in and around construction or building or engineering?
Yeah, I guess this is probably going to be a lot of me talking about my dad, I guess. So shout out to my dad. Dad was a civil engineer back in the day. So, grew up doing a lot of building shelves and woodworking and et cetera, odd stuff around the house. And my dad is also a luthier. For those of you who don't know, it's a custom guitar builder. So I grew up, 14, 15, 16, building guitars, all those kind of things, hanging around with my dad. I did do a lot of study in engineering during high school, which kind of prickled that interest, but I never wanted to be that kind of person. I had a different type of personality to the majority of people who I found in engineering or architecture. So I was trying to find my place where I could kind of play my strengths. So then I chose construction management and kind of being a little bit green to the industry back then, wanted to be a project manager and be the boss and wear the hard hat and the boots and walk around telling people what to do. But I guess quickly found out that wasn't exactly my personality type. So, then I, like I said, played my numbers and found out estimating was probably for me. So, I mean, that's the short version.
Good man. And then construction manager, I'm always fascinated about these education programs. Talk to me about the degree. Was it a case of it was taking into account everything? Did it give you a good taste for civil, ground up, mechanical, electrical, piping, or did it focus on one thing?
No, it's very all round. So I mean, the first couple of years you do a lot of architectural drawing, a lot of understanding drawings, and those kind of basics to construction. You do certain courses like health and safety, tendering, all those bits and pieces, but the courses also focus on, probably substructure, superstructure, and then MEP, which is probably a very, well-rounded approach to it. Looking at that from a more of an elemental basis rather than trade by trade. So, and, like we were talking about before off camera, a lot of the guys back home in University of Newcastle tend to get, some kind of internship, cadetship, or part-time work in the industry as they go to kind of help them learn the industry a bit better. So that really helped for me. I worked as a junior quantity surveyor, cadet quantity surveyor, whatever you want to call it, for a couple of years before graduating, pretty much full-time most of the time. So being able to actually work on projects and read real plans just put you miles ahead of rather than sitting in a lecture theatre, just writing down notes.
Yeah, and when you told me that, I couldn't believe it. I mean, for someone to hold down a full-time job while actually studying a full-time course as well, that's pretty impressive. And I know what you're saying, it's all relatable. So what you're doing in practical, in your day-to-day work, you can bring it back to the college. But I mean, that must have been tough time-wise, time management.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of fun for a couple of years. Didn't really have many weekends. My mates would always say, like, I'd show up to the pub at 8 or 9 o'clock on a Saturday, and they'd be like, "What did you do today?" I was like, "Well, I was at work, and then I had to do a couple of assignments, and et cetera, et cetera." And they're like, "Yeah, it was very much burning the candle at both ends." But if you can do it while you're young, it's a great position to put yourself into.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk, when I interview estimators and pre-construction managers here in the US, they talk quite a lot about their internship and how important that is to deciding what part of construction they want to go into. But it must have been very good for you in the first year degree, going straight into MCG. They were were they a specific quantity surveying company?
Well, actually, if we're speaking about internships, I did have one before that. And my very first year, I worked at a company called North Construction and Building. They run a cadetship program, which is pretty much a summer internship. You would kind of equivalent it to over here in the US. So for 3 months, you kind of cycle through each department. You do a couple of weeks in project management, a couple of weeks in accounts, a couple of weeks on site, a couple of weeks in estimating. And that's kind of where I was saying before, I wanted to be a project manager and the boots on and telling people what to do. But after doing that for a couple of weeks, I decided that really wasn't for me. And then, ideally enough, my next rotation after that was estimating. So nothing like sitting in a nice air-conditioned office, crunching some numbers. That's absolute heaven for me. So, so that was great. I mean, and that kind of internship was really important, just to kind of give you that taste of everything, which I guess a lot of companies back home in Australia do, which is really great. Doing some site engineering, project engineering, and then going into the office and seeing what you'd actually like to do, because you start out, you're so green. But back to your question, MCG started by a couple of Newcastle guys, so very local and small towny, I guess. But yeah, they were a very small firm when they started. I was actually their first cadet they ever hired, so that was nice and humbling. So some good mentors there, which taught me a lot of good hard lessons at some stages. So that was great for me. But they actually went from being one of the smallest quantity surveying firms possible to being in the Business Review Weekly, the BRW Top 100 Smallest Growing Businesses back in, I believe that was the end of financial year 2018 that they went for that. So I was a big part of that, and that was a great kind of achievement to make. And great guys to work for.
Brilliant. Because we talked offline as well about the differences between estimating here in the US, and quantity surveying in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand. Give me an idea as a junior estimator, junior quantity surveyor for MCG, on a day-to-day kind of operations or what you were doing. What sort of tasks would you be doing?
Yeah, because it was a smaller kind of business, I was doing everything. I'd do all the takeoff, all the estimating, all the bills of quantities, all those kind of things. From everything from client management, meetings, phone calls, conference calls, value engineering, to everything under the sun. So I guess the thing that's probably a bit different here in the US is obviously that, excuse me, no one knows what quantity surveying is. And it's a construction role that no one is very familiar with. So I guess moving over to the US, that was an interesting time, but I've always been half quantity surveyor, half estimator. So, I mean, they're much the same, but being able to just be a little bit flexible and a chameleon in that regard has always really helped me throughout my career.
Very good. So talk to me a little bit about that transition and how did it come about? Was it always something that you dreamt of, working in another country? Why the US? Or was it again down to Father Highland that kind of nudged you in the way of America?
This one actually wasn't Father Highland. I think, it was definitely a pipe dream to, getting to those kind of last years of university to, go to a different country and, do it while you can in your 20s kind of thing. So, but initially when I started looking, I was looking at places like London. There's plenty of Australian quantity surveyors in London, but also a lot of places like Dubai and in and around the UAE and Singapore as well. I noticed that those kind of areas were going to be good opportunities for me, and there's going to be a lot of construction going on, and it was going to be very attractive for me. But about, I'm going to say 6 months before graduating, I went on a bit of a round the world trip with one of my best friends. So we went from Australia to the US and a little bit through Europe and other places like that. And on the way home, we went via Dubai and Singapore so that I could check these places out. What would it be like to live? Is this a place I could see myself living? And I kind of got home and, there's nothing wrong with Dubai or Singapore, but apart from the heat, both of them, that's coming from an Australian. Yeah. I just decided that I'd have a lot more fun, I think, and a better lifestyle in the US. So I started to think a little bit more about the US construction industry and found out that, there's it being some of the biggest economies in the world, even California alone, was going to have these incredible opportunities. So I started chasing that kind of role in America. But yeah, I just fell in love with the culture, the people, and the opportunities to work on some of these really big projects.
I just can't imagine where you would even start sitting in Australia, wanting to work in the US, just about to graduate. Is there like programs you can go on? Is there like agents that you can speak to that does that sort of thing? How did you go about securing something?
Well, being a numbers guy, I like to count things, obviously. So I applied to about 2,900 jobs over the course of about...
Could you stop at 29?
29. No. It was a lot of jobs. And thankfully, I just happened I found the needle in the haystack in that regard. I was like you were kind of alluding to before. US is a predominantly GC run pre-construction kind of industry over here. So when I found that needle in the haystack, being Cummings Corporation, they actually hire a lot of Australian expats, quantity surveyors, to work on the consultancy side. So they were very familiar with how to do it and visas and all those kind of things, and they'd done it before, so it was a very comfortable situation for them. And I was already working on the consulting side, so it already kind of just the right puzzle piece at the very last moment. So that was kind of how it all came about. But I think LinkedIn was probably the biggest tool there.
Yeah, so Matt, LinkedIn, it's revolutionized recruiting, getting a new job, how to go about it. So how did someone reach out to you on LinkedIn, or did you kind of expose your profile to the US?
Yeah, so the situation that helped me the best was there's certain settings on LinkedIn where you say you're open to recruiters reaching out to you for certain roles and locations. So I picked a number of probably locations across the US that ideally I'd like to go to, and jobs that I would like to do, estimator, quantity surveyor, all those kind of things. And then was just lucky enough to have one of the recruiters from Cummings reach out to me, and we had a bunch of phone calls saying, here's how we do it, this is what it would look like, this is the kind of project you'd be working on, all those kind of normal things, and just eventually bit the bullet.
Good man. And I know Cummings, they do a lot of Australian quantity surveyors, and they bring them over. How was the actual process once Cummings said, right, Matt, you're the guy for us? Was it a difficult process, or was it a long process, especially the visa process?
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy process. I don't think anyone would assume there's going to be an easy process. I'm on an E3 work visa, which is pretty much an open-ended Australian-only work visa here in the US, which essentially has to be structured around a company can't hire or is struggling to hire someone to fill this position. So we need someone who is a foreigner to fill that position. So there's certain requirements and timelines and applications and interviews that you have to do, which is pretty standard for most work visas. So I think from first speaking to Cummings to then being here in the US, that was a good 3-4 month kind of process.
Okay, well that's not bad. I mean, I'm on an E2 visa, and it took 5 months, I think, from start to finish. When you mentioned the E3 visa, you mentioned it being open ended. What does that mean?
So it's a 2-year work visa, and as long as you don't get arrested for something, you just go back, you apply, and you keep doing it. So there's no I believe on a H1B, it's a 3-year visa, and at the end of that, you're only guaranteed so much. So the E3 visa essentially can last as long as you want. You just have to go back every 2 years to renew and revise.
So you get a free trip home.
I went back last Christmas actually. I did get a free trip home.
Very good. That's good. So do you get home once a year, once every 2 years?
Yeah. So I mean, so far, my parents and family have come to visit a couple of times, and I've gone back once. But I think under kind of certain circumstances at the moment, I'm not sure exactly who will be traveling where and when.
No, well, let's fingers crossed. We're back up in another 5 or 6 months' time, but it's not looking good at the moment. So how are things in Denver? Are you seeing things picking up again?
Yeah, it's been really interesting here in Denver. I mean, there was a big spread in the mountains, so all those kind of smaller mountain towns got hit pretty hard. So the restrictions hit hard very, very quickly there. Here in Denver, I mean, construction's still essential, so it's all just social distancing requirements, hand sanitizing stations. Crews can only work in groups of 2, which has affected certain trades, as you can imagine. Masonry and drywall trades, they like to work as crews. A certain tradesman does a certain thing, but if you're only allowed to work in groups of 2 and you have to have certain requirements, it very much slows down productivity. So that's been a struggle. So not all my projects have been put on hold, but some of them have. So it's been a bit of a juggling act, trying to figure out what to do with which ones and how to best handle it. But I tend to find at the moment, everyone's asking me, when should I tender my project? When should I put this out to bid? And everyone is just sitting on their hands waiting to see what happens. So it's very similar to the stock market at the moment. There's been mum and dads who have invested while it's low, but if certain people start panic buying right now or panic selling because it goes down, then the whole industry could crash. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what happens in the pipelines, especially the subcontractor pipelines in the next 6 months. So I keep telling my clients, just sit on their hands, and I'll tell you when I have better information to tell you.
Yeah, be ready. That's all you got to say. Be ready.
Be ready.
Well, that's good. So you got the visa. If we can kind of jump back again, that you got the visa, E3 visa, made the transition over. Arrived. I think you went straight to Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Straight to Chicago, the Windy City.
Brilliant. Why Chicago? Was that just an opening that the Cummings Group had, or did you have any kind of influence on that?
Yeah, I got the option when I was first speaking with Cummings of a number of different locations. I think they were San Diego, Chicago, and Washington DC. So I spoke to each office, and I just found that the mix of lifestyle and the mentorship that I was going to be able to get in Chicago and the types of projects, it was probably the best decision for me then. I think, again, Chicago is obviously one of the biggest cities in the US, so there's a lot of fun to be had there. And if you've never been, a great city to eat and drink.
Yeah, no, I've been there once. It's great. Can't speak highly enough of Chicago. So, I mean, as an Aussie, just graduated, more or less, a couple of years experience, arriving in Chicago, what is the most difficult thing that happened to you? How was it making the transition from doing things the way that Australia do things as quantity surveying focused construction industry to on the consultancy side with Cummings? What were the most difficult things?
Yeah, I mean, it actually really wasn't too difficult for me. I think there was probably more difficulties in moving my life across the planet. But I mean, in terms of using a different system, going from metric to imperial, that didn't take me too long. Square foot to meters squared isn't too bad of a conversion. I think the biggest challenge that I probably came across was moving to the US was the difference in pricing. I think a lot of people would have that even just moving from different locations in the pre-construction kind of area. You get so used to concrete being so many dollars per cubic square or cubic yard and those kind of things. So then moving to, from Newcastle, a small little town in Australia, to one of the biggest cities in the US, it doesn't exactly apply how much concrete it costs back home to how it does in Chicago. So
you probably need a little bit more concrete to build something in Chicago.
Yeah, and I think the quantity surveyor model being very detailed oriented, being very, very, I guess, rigid, for lack of a better word, compared to that of the US, where things probably flow a bit easier, and the contract methods that they use over here are different. So I think understanding different kind of procurement methods that they use here, understanding pricing, and being able to confidently say, like, no, that is too much, no, that's not enough, you've got a scope gap, you don't. All those kind of things were probably the biggest challenges that I faced.
Yeah. And what did you go straight into? Did you go straight into a specific type of projects? Was it like interior fit outs, or did you have a background in a particular type of project that he says, you know what, I'd be better suited to that retail project, hospitality, healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, when I very first started out in Australia, I did a lot of smaller residential work, a lot of townhouses, villas, all those kind of things, and doing a lot of construction loans for that kind of work, which was great to learn on, because everyone understands what a house is supposed to look like and where beams are supposed to go, and just learning the basics, that was really great for me. So about after a year and a half of doing that, I moved more into the commercial kind of world, doing a lot more ground up construction, a lot more apartment buildings or mixed use, hospitality, retail kind of work, which was great because it was more of a challenge. But then since moving to the US, I pretty much went straight into a semi-permanent QS role with a top 4 tech firm. So that was actually probably going back to what you were just saying before about the transition. I went from being a QS to a QS. So that wasn't too hard, but then the other 50% of the time was learning new stuff. So that was probably a very easy experience or easy transition for me.
Good. And you mentioned, because I know from the UK and Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, QS, they seem to have a lot more control over the project. The projects are more QS led than anything else. Give us an understanding because I think I mentioned to you before, we do a lot of work with the ENR top 400 GCs, commercial GCs, mainly ground up. They always ask me about the consultancy world. I'm not too au fait with it. Give me a basic understanding of how the consultancy world fits into a project, and just the overall role of a consultancy.
Yeah, so I mean, it obviously depends project to project, and there's no perfect answer to that question. I think the way that most consultants or most cost estimating consultants fall into a project is either being hired by the owner or an architect to I guess challenge a GC, either through the pre-construction kind of process or potentially after the contract's being signed with change orders and variations and those kind of things. So it's definitely not an easy question to answer, but I guess from the QS consulting side, having worked in this field for a long time, you are essentially just a estimator who works on project to project and probably isn't doing the entire pre-con process just by themselves. And there's also the aspect of post-construction as well. So I always like to say that being a QS is kind of like being a budget-focused project manager who doesn't have to do any kind of on-site thing. So, and whenever I talk to owners and architects and engineers and all those types of people, I just say to them, anything that has a dollar sign in front of it, I should be concerned, I should be involved. So, I mean, I guess the value that we kind of show and kind of the perks of being in the consultancy world is really the faster paced nature of it and being able to work on kind of different projects all across the world. Some of the coolest projects I've probably worked on is a Buddhist temple in Australia, Wrigley Field in Chicago, and technically speaking, I've worked on a high-end hotel in every country across the world. So wow. There's not a lot of GC estimators who can say that they've done something like that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love it. And those are the quirky, I think that's the quirky stuff that you get to do in construction. And that's the beauty of construction. You can travel the world doing it and it doesn't change that much. Speaking of change in construction, what about technology? What do you guys tend to use on a day-to-day basis? What excites you about technology and construction?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first part is, being a numbers guy, we always use a lot of Excel, and we have different takeoff softwares that we use to assist with those kind of things. But we also do a lot of benchmarking and kind of analyses on different labours and materials, and big spreadsheets full of boring stuff. In terms of technology in the industry, I actually did my thesis on quantity surveying and BIM, which I'm sure is something that you're semi-familiar with. A lot of people, a couple of years.
We actually have a BIM VDC series of the podcasts coming out. So we're going to do 5 of them in total. We have 2 down, so we're doing 3 more. So yeah, BIM VDC, it's changing the game, I have to say.
It definitely is, and I guess my focus has always been, the commentary around, if a computer can do all the takeoff, what do I need a quantity surveyor for? Which is a valid point. So I mean, that was very interesting for me to write and be focused on. But I think at least compared Australia to US, and maybe that's just me working on larger projects now, I'm definitely getting a lot more opportunities to use BIM and use 3D, 4D BIM. To kind of get an understanding and do some of the basic takeoff for a project. I think the thing that we find is the problem with BIM is the model is either not given to us at the right stage, or it's not detailed enough to accurately pull all those quantities off. So there's definitely been some hesitation on our end to fully adopt BIM. But it's definitely a tool that we're going to be using in the future. So it's good to wet your feet in those kind of little bits and pieces.
Absolutely, and if you've done your dissertation on it, it'll give you a great background into what they expect, because I think you're right. I mean, if you look at some of the companies that are working, we did a podcast with Brian Myers at Jacobs, and the kind of stuff that they're putting into, and the focus and the money that they're putting into BIM VDC and leading from the models. We had a chat. I had a chat with Tim Riefenberg, the Beck Group BIM manager, and his background was architecture, and he talks very much all about the model, everything about the model, laser scanning on site, going off the model. If the model changes, we change the model, and everyone is focused and understands the model. If there's a change done, then it's released to you. So that's coming out next week, so I would definitely get a listen to that. But he talks about it as leading the way. So it'll be interesting to see. Listen, we never know. We know construction adapts technology at a different pace to the rest of the world, but it'll be interesting to see. But it's good that you've got that background. Where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? Are you still eager to do a little bit of traveling throughout the US, or what's the plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to answer. I don't know exactly where 5-10 years Matt is going to be. I'd like to say that he keeps progressing up the ranks of a kind of consulting firm, to a stage where potentially I'm managing an office or a department or a sector kind of thing. But, I mean, that would always be my dream. Everyone wants to focus on what they're passionate about. So, I mean, for me, that's mentoring younger people and working on that commercial side and being able to play to my strengths. So. There's definitely a lot to see in the US, so it's always hard to say where I'll be. But I mean, for now, Denver's a beautiful state. 300 days of sunshine, perfect mountains, good beer.
And it's booming as well, because we relocated 3 people there over the last 6 months to Denver, and they absolutely love it. But for someone that has never been to Denver in the US, because we predominantly relocate a lot of people throughout the US, what are the key selling points for you for Denver, or what advice would you give someone else that's considering relocating there?
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very lucky when I moved from Chicago to Denver. I actually started coming out here about once a week for 2.5 months with Cumming to cover a different project that I had a certain specialty with a client who I was already existing with. So that was a great opportunity in Boulder, Colorado. So I got the taste of a Denver summer instead of a humid Chicago summer. Just going out to Boulder a couple of times, falling in love with the mountains, being able to go on the weekends and go paddleboarding and skiing and all those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, it was a very easy transition being once I had the taste of what Colorado life would be. But it was kind of it was never a place I even really considered until I came out here and really knew what it is. But it's got the college town of Boulder. It's got the mountains, which are 20, 35 minutes away. There's all the skiing in the world that you want to do, all the hiking and camping, and like I said, the beer is great. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's because it's completely different to Chicago. Would you agree on that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's very East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking about Australia. Have knowing a little bit about where you've come from in Newcastle, Denver would be more aligned with that than Chicago would.
Yeah, and probably going back to what we were talking about before, when I first wanted to move to the US, I very much had the New York City, Manhattan pipe dream of living in the life of the city and being that big city boy. And I mean, after a year in Chicago, I was like, okay, yeah, that's a skyscraper. I'm done.
I'm where you were at. If it wasn't for my wife, I would have moved already. But she just loves the city, and unfortunately, she runs the office at home. So we'll be sitting in New York for another while. But I think in the near future, I'll be looking to get to. Again, I was brought up on a farm, so my background's all outdoors, greenery, animals, outdoors, hiking, snowboarding. So maybe someday Denver will be on the radar.
Yeah, I just saw a couple of elk this weekend out camping for Memorial Day. So it doesn't sound like it's too far off your alley.
Okay, right. Denver's on the list then. That's it. I've got about 5. I've shortlisted 5 places that we're going to look at. So Denver's going to get on there as well. Okay, so listen, Matt. Obviously, loads of skiing, loads of hiking. What do you do? Are you into sports or anything? What do you do to get away from the office? Because we know how stressful cost management is, especially on the consultancy side. What do you do to get away from the office and take your mind off work?
Yeah, I think I'm still a little bit stuck in my way in terms of Australian sports. So I do follow the rugby league a lot, which no one knows or shows here in the US, and evidently shown at like 3 a.m. every night. So I just follow that and keep in touch with that. But yeah, I mean, I've been trying to get into a lot more American sports. Trying to become a little bit more of a Denver Broncos fan. Sucks that they suck, but you have to do what you have to do. Apart from that, I mean, I just love to hang around some friends and they can make fun of me for my accent and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, being outside, getting some sun. I love to read some books here and there. So yeah, just the normal things that most people like to do. But I try not to get too stressed out about my job.
Good man. So what's the worst thing that has happened to you as an Aussie in the US? What is the biggest insult? Is it the whole "Are you from New Zealand?" shout?
Oh yeah, that always grinds my gears, and I'm like a bull in front of a red flag when someone mistakes me for a Kiwi. Probably the worst thing that happened to me ever since I moved, or actually was moving. I flew from Sydney to Dallas, and then from Dallas to Chicago. So Sydney to Dallas is something like a 16 hour flight, and I was supposed to have a 2-hour stopover.
Yeah.
But then I got stuck in the immigration line because everyone on that flight was immigrating or something like that. So missed my connecting flight. Had to wait for 4 hours in Dallas airport. Then we finally get on the plane, and then a thunderstorm rolls in, and we're sitting on the tarmac for another 3 hours while the storm goes away. And then I finally get to Chicago at something like 2 a.m. on the same day I left or something like that. It was something like 36 hours of travel. Landed in Chicago, and my phone wouldn't work, and I couldn't call an Uber, and it was a fucking nightmare. Yeah. So then it was something like 40 something hours of travel, and then I got to bed and I couldn't sleep. And then I was supposed to meet my boss the next day, but my phone wouldn't work, so then I stood him up. So that was a stressful couple of days. Just anyone out there who's moving.
Yeah, but it's a long way. Like when you think about it, I mean, one of the reasons we left Australia was because the how far it was away from Ireland. But from Chicago, it's a tough journey.
Yeah, it was not a lot of fun. So, but I was in happy spirits just to be there. So that was fun.
Good,
I mean, there's been plenty of times where people get under my skin by saying XYZ, g'day mate, blah blah blah. But you know, it's a lot of fun being an Australian in America. They're very thankful to have me here.
Yeah, it's just good banter. Well, listen, if there is someone in Australia or even anywhere else in Europe or Australasia, what advice would you give them about coming to work in the US? Obviously, you're having a great time, so you'd recommend it. What sort of advice would you give, and even your younger self coming out of college in Australia, thinking about going to the US, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say prepare for the worst. You can never be too prepared. Definitely learn about the pricing. That was hard for me. If you're very good at your takeoff and you know what you're doing when you're looking at drawings, you won't have any trouble being able to read drawings or anything like that. I think a generic understanding of conversions between meters squared and square feet and cubic yards and all those kind of things, having those metrics in the back of your head was very useful for the first kind of 3 months for me. I would also definitely read up on the standardized processes that they have here, whether or not that just be divisions 1 through 16, CSI 16, those kind of things, or different contract methods that they use. That'll probably be our biggest advice.
Good. No, that's great advice, and I'm sure our audience will love that. Listen, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much, Matt. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting this out there, and we'll keep in touch with your career. Maybe we'll get you on in maybe 12, 24 months time and see where you're at, see what part of America you've emigrated to then.
Sounds great.
Good man, Matt. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.